situation in Nepal is very uncertain. When the first, corona cases started in China, we didn't expect the corona to go pandemic, and finally when the first case came to Nepal, it was March, and government immediately locked down the whole country. Because we have heard about corona, but we are not expecting it to be really worse, so we weren't really prepared for that. So when lockdown happened, so it all caught us by surprise, and it was quite difficult. It was quite challenging to immediately, change our work. So it took us a bit of time, but initially there was about 3 months lockdown, and after that, when we started working, it really affected all our activities. Now we've been providing free education to poor families and poor children. So primary school, I think, was the mostly affected because all the schools were closed down. We were not allowed to open, and all the other schools, like private schools and other bigger schools, slowly they moved to online classes. Whereas for us, it was very, very challenging because firstly we didn't have that infrastructure, and secondly, all the children were from low-income families, and many of them could not afford the new smartphone devices required for these online classes and also internet connectivity. So from this year, we've been providing online classes, but still there are some students who still cannot afford those technologies. So what we've been doing is we've been inviting those children. There were just 1 or 2 students in each class. So they're coming to our school, and teachers are giving them, when they're giving online education, so they're staying in the class and learning. If we talk about vocational training, that was also affected, drastically. But to give you an example, like for our carpentry training, that was ongoing and 2 months had already passed. But when this COVID hit and the second lockdown began, so we had to stop the training. But after the lockdown opened, all the students, their children, they also had children and they had to go online classes. So the parents, the mothers, they had to stay on and guide their children. So they couldn't come to the training. So what we decided, we discussed with them and we said, okay, if we can't do the whole day, let's do certain hours per day. So at least you can continue the training. So with that agreement, we did a half-a-day training instead of full. But the consequence of that is the training's gonna last a bit longer than we had planned. Our working model is already home-based, so most of our knitting production was already being done at home. So in that respect, we're already prepared for home-based working, especially brought about by COVID-19. But the problem we faced was to distribute the yarns and to collect the finished products, because government has imposed transport restrictions where only odd and even numbers, registration number will apply in the odd and even dates. So because of that, we had some delays. And also another problem we faced was, when the producers, they knitted the products, they had to bring it to us for QC and finishing. So we had to wait 24 hours. So as a precaution, so we had to put it overnight or at least 24 hours before we started finishing work on that. So of course that caused some delays.
मेरो नाम विद्या मल्ल श्रेष्ठ मेरो श्रीमान अनि दुईटा छोरी हुनुहुन्छ मेरो छोरी एउटा 12 क्लास पढ्दैछ, एउटा 9 क्लास जोइन हुनेछ। म पाटनमा बस्छु, पाटन यहाँ चोकमा। म 48 वर्ष भयो। म कुमेश्वर टेक्निकल स्कुलमा काम गर्छु, त्यहाँ बुनाइको काम गर्छु। म त्यहाँ स्वेटर, पन्जा, मोजा, मफलर, टोपी त्यस्तो बुन्छु। अनि त्यहाँ बसेर काम गर्ने होइन, म घरैमा ल्याएर गर्ने। अनि त्यहाँ धागो लिन जाने र रेडी भएको सामान पुर्याउन जाने मात्र काम गर्छु, अरू म गर्दिनँ। अनि त्यहाँ बसेर गर्ने होइन। कोरोना भन्दा अगाडि पनि त्यस्तै गरिरहेको, अहिले पनि त्यस्तै गरिरहेको छु। पोहोर साल लकडाउन हुँदा चैतबाट सुरु भएको थियो। अनि अलिकति काम ल्याइरहे पनि सबै सकाएर घरमै ठन्क्याइरहे, दिन पनि जानु पाएन, काम पनि लिन पाएन। मलाई धेरै नै गाह्रो भयो बच्चाहरूको स्कुल फीतिर। घरमा बच्चाहरूलाई अब टाइममा खुवाउनु पर्यो, खान बस्न धेरै नै गाह्रो भएको थियो मलाई। अनि 6 महिनापछि फेरि लकडाउन खोलेपछि अनि फेरि त्यो काम पनि दिन गए। फेरि अर्को काम पनि लिएर आएँ मैले। लिएर आएर अलिक सजिलो भइरहेको थियो। फेरि यो वर्षको वैशाखदेखि लकडाउन भएर 2-3 महिना लकडाउन हुँदाखेरि त मलाई एकदमै गाह्रो भयो। बच्चाहरूको स्कुल फी पनि तिर्न सकेको छैन मैले। अब कलेज, अब एकजना एसएलसी पास भयो, अब त्यसलाई कलेज पनि जोइन गर्न मलाई एकदमै मुस्किल भइरहेको थियो। मेरो श्रीमानको पनि काम छैन अहिले। भूकम्पले मेरो घर भड्काएको थियो। उहाँको अफिसमा भूकम्पपछि ठ्याक्क 2 वर्षपछि उहाँको रिटायर भयो। रिटायर भएपछि एकमुष्त पैसा आएकोले मेरो घर भड्केको घर बनाउँदै पैसा सकियो। अनि अब कुमेश्वरको काम त्यति भएकोले मलाई खान बस्न पुगिरहेछ।
Because the COVID-19 was spreading everywhere, so of course a lot of our staff and many of our producers were also infected. Thankfully, nobody had a serious infection and nobody died from it. But there were a few people who got infected. Because of that, they had to stay in isolations, and that brought further delays. Sometimes also shipment was delayed, or we had to not to cancel, but we had to send the remaining, whatever was left over in the next shipment. So the shipment cost also increased in that respect. Another big problem faced because of this COVID infection was one of our dye expert. So she and her family were all infected. And because of that, our whole dye unit were closed for almost 2 weeks. So that also created a lot of delays. So in production, there was a lot of delays that really, caused this, and it was very difficult for us to send shipment on time. And another issue we really faced big challenge was finding raw materials. Raw material in respect, not the main raw materials. With the wool, we usually purchase it for a whole year. So we had already purchased all the yarn enough for a whole year's production. So that didn't affect us so much. But what affected was buying trims, like labels, buttons, So most of the labels, all the materials were imported from India. So because of that, there was long delays in getting raw materials. So that also caused a lot of delays. From this year, when there was lockdown, what we did was we already provided enough work for at least 1 month for all our home-based producers. So that really helped us to, do all the production. But later what happened was we had realized even before that there will be a lot due for QC and finishing. So that's going to pile up. So that really piled up, and we had to stay overtime. All of our colleagues stayed overtime, and the shipment also delayed by almost 2 months. So those kind of things really hampered our production. Being a fair trade organization, most of our buyers also are fair trade. So because of that, none of the orders were cancelled. Of course, because this is a global pandemic, so everybody was affected. So in that respect, a few of the buyers had to cancel the orders because of the financial situation. But some of the buyers actually increased the orders for us, especially El Puente. So last year they increased the order because when we told them about some order cancellation, so that really helped us. So I think we're very lucky that we're in a fair trade network, and the fair trade solidarity is what it got us through this crisis, and that will also help us. So not only the orders, but a lot of our fair trade buyers, because during the lockdown time, a lot of our producers and all the staff are low-income families. So they're really dependent on the income through these works. So during the lockdown time, it was very difficult for us to pay them wages. And, not only we had the cash flow issues, but there was also like technical issues, like how do we pay the salaries? In Nepal, the electronic payment system is not very well used. Slowly, I think after the pandemics, that's increasing. But before that, we didn't have any way to pay them. So we had to be there physically, and we needed physical signatures. So that was a difficulty we faced. But to pay for because we had a cash flow problem, like El Puente and other fair trade partners, they also provided us with donations. So which really helped us to continue providing salary, especially to our primary school teachers, who are continuing their work through telephone and also now through online. So that really helped us through these difficult times. So in our daily lives, yes, of course, it has affected everyone. Most of our staffs and producers, as I said, they're dependent on the salaries and wages they receive from work with us. So because of the lockdown period, we were not able to provide the salaries. So of course, they really had to struggle because of the cash flow issues. And also not only that, there's also a lot of increase in food prices. There's inflation. So that also really affected everyone. And another big one is also the psychological issues. Because during that time, everybody was very scared, especially at the beginning. Everybody was so scared to come to even offices, even after the lockdown opened, the lockdown eased. People were still scared, and people were wearing maybe double masks, sanitizing their hands every few minutes. So it was very psychological. People were so scared to come to office, even to interact with people. When the second wave hit, we had a 2 months lockdown. After the lockdown, the restriction has been eased. And so a lot of people are going back to work. A lot of markets are opening. So because of that, people are seeing, usual crowds, and people are taking less precautions. And, because of, they're not keeping the social distancing. And, because of that, so there's a risk that the infection will rise again. So, it's also very difficult because, during the lockdown, we also had a very difficult time. People had difficulty because they were not working and they were not earning. So, that also created difficulty. So it's a very difficult to balance. The COVID pandemic, I think going through it now, what it teaches us is, the gap between the rich and poor is increasing. And now we see that the poor people need more support. So we need to really continue our program to provide free education to the low-income families, and also vocational training. So, they have a skill so they can earn their income. So that has become very important now even more. So for that, we have been, through our income opportunity program, we have been funding these programs. But still we were not able to fully sustain ourselves. But before the COVID, 80% of our costs were covered through the income of this fair trade products, sales from this fair trade products. But now I think in these 2 years, the coverage has decreased to 20%. So for the future plan, I think we want to continue, going to producing the fair trade products and, you know, to increase sales. So we're able to sustain ourselves. You know, in the future, maybe in 5 years or even 10 years time, we want to be 100% self-sustainable. So that was our main goal, because that only to help a lot of low-income families here in Nepal.